Hey everybody, my name is Eric. I am a junior developer at a small software company, and I'm here today to talk to you about what I believe is the best beginner coding language. So let's get to it. So I think one of the most important things to ask yourself before you start coding or trying to learn a language is, what's the why? Why do you want to code? And I think that is really what you need to answer, because depending on what that answer is, will tailor the response. And for me, I'm a web developer. So for me, I have my choice, and get ready, because some of you are going to click away. I think the best coding language to learn for a web developer is PHP. Now, the reason that I say PHP is the best language to learn is kind of a weighted story. So I might as well just get into it and tell you exactly why I believe PHP is the language for you to learn, and that's including this year in 2024 and moving forward. So I think the best thing to do is tell you my story and how I became a web developer. I do not have a background in software. I didn't go to college for computer science or anything like that. And so actually, believe it or not, I come from the world of hospitality. I spent 17 years as what's known as a corporate social director, which basically meant that I planned events, I made particular activities, in particular for big businesses that went on corporate retreats. And I did that for 17 years. And in my experience over that 17 years, I found that I was always trying to push the envelope of activities that we could offer. And so for a long time, we just used the whole Microsoft ecosystem. We would build paper puzzles and Microsoft Publisher, and we would do all sorts of different things. And eventually we ended up going to Microsoft PowerPoint and creating kind of like video and media and all sorts of cool stuff, but it was in the slides program. And eventually what I wanted to do was I made a game, we called it Trivimoji. And the idea is to come up with almost like a Pictionary type game. So if the category was music, and I'm trying to my solution is American Pie, I might grab the pizza slice emoji and grab the American flag emoji, and you might be able to put in your head, the category is music, it's American Pie. So because I wanted to do that, I needed drag and drop functionality, and PowerPoint doesn't really work that way. I broke into the actual developer portion of PowerPoint, but it just wasn't enough. So that led me down the path of really learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that kind of all started with a book. So the first book that I went out and I purchased was the Quick Start Guide for HTML and CSS. It's from Amazon. I will post in the details below a link to it. I don't have it with me because honestly it's so good. I've lent it out to people. So people come out and they ask, how did you make the career switch or whatever it is? I start with this book. So I would recommend that. And so when I got started with HTML and CSS, I realized the power of what we could actually build in that. And so as time went on and I got better with it, I realized eventually that I had to make things happen on the screen. And the skinny of the whole thing is, if you want to do something in the browser, you need JavaScript. So if you don't like JavaScript, web development, maybe might be challenging for you, but JavaScript was my first programming language. And again, I dove right into it. I figured, hey, HTML, CSS, I learned this in like a month. JavaScript will take like 3 at the most. So since I had so much success with using a book, I thought, hey, same thing. I'll go on Amazon again. I'll find the highest rated book, and did a little bit of shopping. And I came up with this book right here. It's John Duckett's JavaScript to jQuery book. It's fantastic. It's really, really good. But I quickly realized that there's a big difference between HTML and CSS and JavaScript. For those of you that don't know, HTML and CSS is more like a declarative language, right? So you want to make a div the color blue, right? So you say in CSS, you'll say background color blue. That's how you would tell it to do so. And JavaScript is imperative, so it's a different way of telling the program or whatever you're running what you want to actually do. So it's not just saying this thing is this and that thing is that. It's more like grab all the things that I want. We're going to assign them to a variable and then change them programmatically, and we can do that using loops and different things. So conceptually, I was not ready for this book, but this book did bring those concepts to me. So as I said, I figured it would be 3 months tops till I can understand enough JavaScript that I could be productive. And to be honest with you, I did make several different things. I made the game that I wanted to with the drag and drop functionality. I made several different games, but they weren't really coded well. You couldn't tell when you played them, but they just weren't that good. And so I said, we got to do something else. And the biggest problem was the fact that there was no back end to these applications. They were all just front end. Because again, JavaScript, although it is on the back end through Node.js, it isn't just inherently a back-end language. It's the language of the browser. So I needed to learn how to communicate with the back end and a database and all those different things. And so I started to look into how to do that, and went down a whole rabbit hole. And I'm sure everybody out there has been through these particular issues before, where you just feel like all you're getting is noise, right? You're getting, this is the best, or that is the best, and do this and do that, and this is the language you should use, and all these other things that are going on, and you end up in this cycle of where you don't actually learn anything because you're trying to learn too much. So for me at this point in time in my career, I said, you know what? It's too much noise. I don't know what I should be focusing on. I don't know what to look to. And so I decided to sign up for a boot camp. So I signed up for the boot camp, and it was a 9-month boot camp. So it was a slow-paced version of it. So there was a lot of learning that was going on during it, and it allowed me to do my full-time job and take care of my family and all the other things that were important to me. And by the end of the boot camp, I realized that the point of boot camps really isn't to make you an expert coder, so to speak, right? Anyone that's gone through boot camp knows exactly what I'm talking about. You come out and you just feel like you've been exposed to everything, and I think that's the point, right? You're trying to get your first junior developer job, and they expose you to Docker, and so when you see it in your first job, you're like, oh well, I've used Docker before. I'm not good with Docker, but I've used it before. So I think that's really the point of boot camps, is to try to get you exposed to a lot of things. And yeah, you do gain a lot of knowledge, and you do get better with your understanding of everything, especially when you're on your own and you're trying to teach yourself. With a curriculum, it's easier because someone else that knows has put this knowledge together, right? Like, you're watching this video, I've been through this, I can share my experience. And that's really the big thing that you gain with boot camps. But anyway, so got through the boot camp. I did very well in it, and during the boot camp, I actually got my first software job. The company I work for, we actually work with Microsoft Access is the main driving force of our company, and that's in the language of VBA. So VBA became my second coding language. Now, if you're interested in web applications, VBA really isn't what you want to learn, but it is the language of things like Excel, Microsoft Access, and all the Microsoft programs. So it's still relevant, it's still useful, but not really relevant to our conversation today. But really what happened was we got a client that came in, and they wanted to revamp their forms. They wanted to do an application that had over 100 questions on it. Their forms filled out in time, and there was, due to the nature of the business, there was time sensitivity. They needed to get things submitted quickly in a faster fashion with no missing data. So they turned to us because they were a local company, and my boss was like, "Hey, we do Access, but you have all the web experience. Do you think you could take this project on?" I said, "Absolutely, I can." Thinking, it was in the language that I knew, but it really wasn't. It was actually in PHP, vanilla, old school PHP. So I jumped in, I started to learn the language, and to be honest with you, at the very beginning of it, I saw why there was so much hate for PHP out there. And I actually opened one of the files. It was 10,000 lines of poorly written code. Things that were, because you could tell different coders had worked on it before. There were things that were object-oriented and some that were procedural, and some using recent PHP, some using old school PHP, and it was really, really difficult project. But by the end of it, I had a very good understanding of PHP, and to be honest with you, I have grown to really, really love the language, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So for starters, if you did not know, PHP is basically, right now, I think around 79% of the entire internet. So when you think about that and you say, hey, I want to be a web developer, and the thing that you want to do, almost 80%, right? 4 out of 5 web pages that you're looking at are done in PHP. And so if you're a web developer, it's really, I think, crucial to at least be exposed to it at some point, because, again, 80% of the internet is written in PHP. Sorry, 79% of the internet is written in PHP. So the second reason that I really, really enjoy working with PHP is the way that it really focuses on relational databases as opposed to non-relational databases. So like things like MySQL seamlessly work with the language PHP. For anybody out there that's a JavaScript programmer, you're more used to working with just raw JSON data and working with a MongoDB. Which is a NoSQL. And so being me at a shop that's a Microsoft shop, and we're working with Microsoft Access, which uses SQL, and we work with Microsoft SQL Server, which uses SQL. It was nice to be able to kind of have one way of communicating with our database. And to be honest with you, I really prefer working with a SQL database over a NoSQL database. For anybody out there that maybe is working on trying to do that, I recommend, this is the same brand of book that I recommended with HTML CSS, but it's the SQL Quick Start Guide. This is a really good read. Will get you up and running to really understand SQL and get you a lot of reps, a lot of practice with it. Another reason that I really like PHP is that it affords you the ability to code either object-oriented or procedural. So you could code either way. So whatever you're more comfortable doing, you can code that way. Something like a C#, that's an object-oriented language, or Java. They're object-oriented, and you have to understand the object-oriented way of doing things. So when you're a rookie coder, procedural coding is a lot easier to understand, which is why I think JavaScript is very, very big as a first language to learn. JavaScript's a great first language to learn because it's a little bit easier to understand. You're not worrying about things like inheritance, or you're not worrying about classes. There are classes in JavaScript, but you generally, when you're starting out, you're not doing that sort of thing. So it's a lot easier for beginner programmers to start doing that, and I like it because I can do object-oriented and I can do procedural. So where procedural shines, I can use that type of code. Where object-oriented shines, I can use that type of code. I have the ability to do that, and I think that's one of the major strengths of PHP. I know some people will say that's a weakness, but I think it's a strength. Now I also hinted at this earlier, saying that PHP is 79% of websites use PHP, and to be honest with you, reason that's so high is because a lot of CMSs, content management systems, use PHP, right? Your Drupals of the world, your WordPress, all those are the ones that actually use PHP as the language that they're built in. So what's really nice about learning PHP is you get exposure if you want to go and use WordPress, or you want to use Joomla, or you want to use any of those CMSs out there. You get exposure to working with an established code base, right? So you're not just writing hello world, document get element by ID, hello world, and then saying, you want to make it change the color, So I think working in an established code base really cements your understanding of how the code eventually is going to work, and you get to go and see what your first job is really going to be like, because when you get your first job, 99% of the time I feel like it's going to be for a company that already has established code bases, that already has classes that they use. That really helps when you're exposed to the way that coders code, and I think that's a good thing. And speaking of WordPress, that's a great one to learn if you want to be, like an independent contractor or a freelance web developer, because the amount of functionality that you get through WordPress is pretty amazing. So anybody out there is interested in doing that, this book right here, this is an O'Reilly book, Building Web Apps with WordPress. Highly recommend reading this. Really helps you understand the way that whole ecosystem works. But again, WordPress is built in PHP, and 40% of the web is WordPress. That's incredible. So if you want to be a web developer, I think PHP is a good option for you to learn. And the last thing I'm gonna hit on is honestly, maybe not just a PHP thing, but it does kind of put a point for PHP as being your first language, and it's a great community. And there's a lot of communities out there, right? But whatever language that you're in, C#, JavaScript, you name it, Rust. Everyone's out there and they're in their communities, and strong opinions are out there. But the PHP community seems like a really, really good one to be involved in. Everyone's very helpful. There's not a lot of talking down to people. They're very welcoming of beginners, and a lot of people will actually help you along the way. Whereas, I felt like, when I was trying to ask a JavaScript question on Stack Overflow, I was not getting very many nice responses there. So the PHP community seems to be very helpful. And also if you start to go down and you get more involved in it, there's the whole Laravel system where it really simplifies routing and a lot of the different things through PHP. So it's not as it doesn't bind you as much as WordPress does, because WordPress is very opinionated, and Laravel will let you do a little bit more to really kind of have freedom in what you want to do, and make it quick and easy to put an app like that together. But definitely do not recommend learning Laravel until you have a full understanding of PHP. So there you have it. I mean, I have the choice. I know JavaScript. I can do that. I've been exposed to C#. I've used it, and I really, really feel strongly about PHP, especially for your first language. It's going to really help you have that understanding of the back end. So the last reason I think PHP is the best first language to learn for a web developer is that it's really, really easy to understand where the front end and the back end meet. By that I mean that PHP, as long as it's a PHP file, it will integrate with HTML. So this gets into the weeds a little bit, but the way that the language actually works is when somebody sends the request to the server grabs all the data dynamically. So it runs on the server finds the data that you need, and then it takes the PHP code, it injects it into the HTML and sends it back to the person's browser as HTML. And so the advantage of that is when you write PHP, you put, I'm sure you've all seen it, you put little brackets and a question mark and write the letters PHP, and then you can echo out data. So if you called something in from SQL, and you named it, your variable was first name, you put in, the open bracket $, or open bracket question mark, and you put your echo $, first name, and then you put a semicolon, you close your PHP tags, and when you send that back to the browser is going to read whatever your SQL statement had pulled from the database and put it in. Now, I know that they have this kind of functionality in JavaScript, but usually you have to download a library. So if you're working in Node.js, this would be something like similar to Handlebars or EJS. So it works kind of the same way, but it's just native to the way PHP works. So it really helps you cement the understanding of how the website or the web page is being rendered out and how it's being sent. and really how you're connecting the back end and the front end. So it really meshes that middle part together very, very well and seamless. And it makes you understand very easily how to do that. You don't get caught up in, oh, what's the best one to use? Do you use handlebars? Do you use Pug? Do you use EJS? What is it that you use? It's just, you don't have to decide, right? It's there. You just use PHP and it's working. And I think that's, again, the power of learning PHP as your first language is because you get a better understanding of the back end, which brings us full circle now to why not JavaScript first, right? And why PHP beforehand. And the reason for that is because that what I just talked about, that understanding of how the back end, connects through the front end, right? So the connecting all the dots there on how things work and how they're rendered, because when you do the front end, and again, I went that JavaScript route first. When you do the front end first, you don't have an appreciation for what you need to do on the back end of things, and really where the power of the website is in the back end. Yeah, I mean, you can do all sorts of great stuff with the front end, but everything's working through an API, and an API is basically a URL that is running a whole bunch of back end code and then sending it back, and then you're rendering it however you want to, whether that be in vanilla JavaScript or React or Vue or whatever it might be. And so, I think really learning PHP first helps you understand how that all works, and it makes you a better coder overall. And that's why I would recommend it, as your first language. Maybe a little bit of JavaScript, at first, but I still think, PHP would be good. Your websites aren't going to do cool things, and that's going to be, hard for some people to be like, oh, this is lame. I can't. It looks terrible. I can't make anything happen on the screen. But really, that's when you get later on in your career, you'll thank me for saying that, because I really think learning PHP first will help you be a better developer and help you be a better JavaScript developer eventually, or better programmer for whatever language that you actually want to learn. So there you have it. That is why I think that the best programming language to start with for a beginner is PHP. So hey, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Leave a comment down below, and you can also find all the links to the books that I recommended for beginners out there. Hopefully anybody that needed to hear this, that's looking to get their first job and really wants to be in web development, heard it, and it's somewhat helpful and kind of guides you the right direction on your journey. So again, send me a like, and if you guys like this content, I'll keep putting it up. Thanks.